So I think the specific roadblocks that I've had to overcome, particularly recently, are the political rhetoric has just been heating up so much. On the one hand, it kind of creates an opportunity because I think more people are willing to recognize the need to work on inclusion and to focus on equity. But on the other hand, it's just become so toxic that everything has become politicized. You know, the science of unconscious bias, which used to be pretty well established, became a topic of debate during the last presidential election, whether or not it existed, and we needed to focus on it. So I think just the polarization of our society and the way in which everything is just becoming politicized and you have to choose sides makes it really hard to get a wide consensus to focus on, you know, eliminating racism. It shouldn't be a partisan issue, but sadly, sometimes it is. Sure, so I lived for 5 years in Vancouver, Canada, which was really transformational for me for a couple of reasons. One, it's the West Coast, and it's similar to the American West Coast of just a little bit more openness. There's a lot of immigration. But two, Canadian society is a little bit different than American society, so it was multilingual from its foundation. So they had French and English as two national languages, and so from the very beginning they've had a little bit more openness to how do we manage a large country and a large society with a lot of differences in it. So whereas in America we tend to use the melting pot as our immigration metaphor, they use the mosaic, which is everybody keeps their individual culture and it still makes one big beautiful picture. So I think having grown up in Richmond, we just didn't talk about difference a lot, and then when I moved to Canada it was an interesting open topic where people were like, where's your family from? What languages do you speak? And it just became normal to accept and celebrate differences, and that was really transformational for me. So I chose to move back for a couple of reasons. One, having grown up here in the 90s, a lot of my peers and friends chose to leave. They went west, they went north, and kind of if they were frustrated by what they grew up here around in Richmond, they just moved on. And I kind of felt like, having done that for 5 years on the West Coast, I was like, how is Richmond ever going to change if people who are frustrated with some of the slowness to change don't come and work on it? And so part of it was that, and the other was that I was reading a lot of Wendell Berry, who talks about the importance of rootedness and being in place, and how a lot of American society problems come because we're disconnected from community, from the land, and we just want to move around a lot. And that was certainly true of me, and I love travel, and at the same time I thought, well, maybe it's important to kind of plant your feet in a community and you know, commit for at least a little while and see if you can make a difference. So I decided to come back to the place that raised me and see what I could do to help make it better. I think it's always a challenge when you don't have a lot of power. So to be realistic about that, but for me, I guess I would say just always be asking the question of who's at the table. Do we have everybody at the table that we need to? Would we be more effective if we were to include other people? You're going to be more successful if you can tie it to the business case for whoever you're working with and help them understand why it's in their interest. But I guess I would say just continually raise the question and do it in as consistent a way as you possibly can without irritating everybody that you're working with and getting run out so that they won't hear you anymore. Oh, so best year that's a challenging question, I think, because it varies a lot, but I'll say I'll have two favorite projects that happen pretty close to each other. One, I was invited to facilitate dialogues with members of Congress about race and the lingering impact of racism in American society, and we did a civil rights pilgrimage through the South and went to various sites. Medgar Evers, who was a civil rights activist who was shot, we met his widow, we saw his house, and then I was facilitating a dialogue with bipartisan Republicans and Democrats, black and white, on what the civil rights means today, and why do we need to look at that history? And that was a pretty spectacular moment. I was sitting at a table, and I had John Lewis, who actually was part of SNCC and the civil rights movement, and had marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in the 60s on one side, and Eric Cantor, who was a Richmond representative at the time, and the majority leader in the House on my other side, and being able to facilitate a conversation with high-level people about why we still need to be, or powerful people, how about that, people with power, to facilitate that conversation was pretty spectacular. So I think that was one of my favorite projects to work on. Also, Tim Kaine was on the bus and played harmonica for us all, so that was fun too, to see the human side of these folks who usually are just a news story.